Alright, so haven't seen any of this video. Also just installed a webcam and dude, freaking mad sick, bro. You know what I'm saying? Got it right on the screen over there on the Monteezy. Um, this is where you guys are placed. Camception. Camception? Just using slang, you know. Anyway, what's up, boys? So I'm Jordan. I run the Confluencism 101 YouTube channel. Um, so I've been working on Confluencism for I don't know, like maybe like 7 months. I'm 17. Um, just been working on the channel. Um, I created it because I've I've been interested. I've always been interested in politics, but I liked hearing different things. You know what I'm saying? My family, um, they're like very Republican. So I don't know. I always heard like right wing things, and um, I always thought, okay, I'm always hearing this. Like I have to hear something else, And let me turn this up. Okay, that should be better. Okay, and I always like thought like there has to be something that people see on the other side that they believe is right. You know what I'm saying? So I started doing my own research, and for a while I had been interested in like what socialism, because I always knew like what socialism was about, um, but like I never really looked into it, and I started looking into it, and I was just saying like I'm not necessarily looking into it because I think it's the right thing, but I didn't want to go into it with the mindset of that also. Like I wanted to go in with an open mind, but I also didn't want to be propagated into something because maybe it wasn't good. You know what I'm saying? Because I didn't know. Um, so like I started looking into it, and there was things I agreed with, there was things I didn't agree with, and I looked more into capitalism. So I said, okay, um, what is it that I really don't like about capitalism specifically? And it was a lot of the things that socialism had gripes with, of course. But I had gripes with socialism as well. And that's kind of what led me to creating Confluencism. And it was more of just like, I was interested in it. I never really like thought I was going to start a channel at first, honestly. Um, I just, I don't know. I find making videos fun. I find it interesting. Um, I like editing and stuff like that. All right, that is good for now. I absolutely cannot. I don't care to fix it. I don't care. That's it for this. I might just leave it like that. I honestly don't care enough. I think that even that. I made it
I've
in
realized
Canva.
that a lot of you get frustrated by the videos I make. So in my videos, I talk about different problems in today's society. There are two problems I keep coming back to. One, that the way we work today is absurd. And two, that inequality is reaching insane levels.
Those are also one of the things that led me to making Confluencism as well. So it's actually very interesting.
And a lot of you are telling me in the comments that sure, these are two important problems, but why aren't you talking about any solutions? And I have to admit, that criticism
We
is
love
fair.
solutions, bro. We love
So for this
solutions.
video, I traveled from Stockholm to Gothenburg to meet author and filmmaker Patrik Witkowski, who believes that there is a real solution that could not only make work less miserable, but also reduce inequality and solve democracy.
I mean, we usually talk about having a job. We're born, we go to school, and we get hair under our arms, and then we get a job. What is getting a job? Getting a job is basically that you as an individual, you agree to rent yourself to a company where there's a board and top managers that is unaccountable to you. You don't get to decide who should be your boss, so to speak. You know, we have this idea of political democracy. We take that for granted, that we can vote our, who we want to have as our political leaders. But then on the other hand, most of us go spend our daily lives working in institutions where there is no democracy.
Not only is work today undemocratic, it's also increasingly totalitarian and dystopian.
Bro, like look at Amazon. Bro, they have like cameras and shit they put in like each like row that they have all their packages in, where they're watching the employees to see if they're like doing stuff. Like, it's worker mistrust now is like at an all-time high with these businesses, and it's nuts, bro. It's terrible. Like, they don't trust workers. But if workers owned part of the business, it's totally different.
Many large
Dynamic totally changes. Dynamic totally changes.
And dystopian. Many large corporations, including Amazon and Walmart, the two largest US employers, are using ever more oppressive technologies like AI-powered cameras to monitor its workers' every move.
So it's really like, a Black Mirror kind of episode when you hear of some of these techniques that are being implemented in some workplaces. So it's really like a totalitarian development that is taking place in society, but we don't talk about it as a totalitarian development because it's in the so-called private sphere.
I've talked a lot in my videos about how broken things are, and in this one I will do that too. I will explain how the way we organize work leads to a number of bad outcomes, but I will also talk about something else. That maybe work hasn't always been this bad, and maybe we can fix it. For most of human history, most people have worked for themselves, as hunters, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. And while systems of slavery and coercion of course have always existed, for those who were free, autonomy was often central to work. Then, 200 years ago, the Industrial Revolution changed everything.
Yeah, bro, like, I learned in my history class, right? You know what I'm saying? Doing my learning and shit. Before the Industrial Revolution, we would, like, make things in our homes and make products in our homes and then kind of sell that on the market. Like, we would be our own street vendors, basically, and make our money that way and then buy what we need. Once we sold stuff. It's interesting how it changed so quickly. It's nuts.
On a mass scale, people went from working for themselves to working for the man. As this shift was unfolding, many viewed it with deep suspicion and even horror.
So going back to like the early 1800s, you have, for example, Alexis de Tocqueville, who is today, someone who is revered by both people from the left and from the right.
In the 1830s, Tocqueville traveled across the United States and carefully documented what he saw in the book Democracy in America.
And he's very impressed by a lot of things, the lively town meetings in New England, and it's kind of like a very agrarian system where a lot of people work for themselves. He likes the whole Republican idea that you don't have, a monarchy. But then he says, there's one thing that's bothering me, and that's these big manufacturing aristocracies, as he talks about.
The manufacturing aristocracy, which is growing up under our eyes, is one of the harshest which ever existed in the world. If ever a permanent inequality of conditions and aristocracy again penetrate into the world, it may be predicted that this is the channel by which they will enter.
Suddenly you have one employer who is becoming the administrator of a vast empire. And under him, you have a lot of people who are just becoming dependent on him, subordinate to him. So you again start to see a society with the rulers who give orders and the people who obey. They don't think for themselves, they just spend their lives taking orders. Well, what is this if not aristocracy?
That's what school teaches too. Like they put every desk in rows. I mean kids always talk about this, you know what I mean? But it's true. Like school doesn't allow kids to learn their own way. You know what I'm saying? And they almost like put on this like face that kids learn the same, and they can learn the same if they choose to. They just don't want to pay attention or something. But like kids genuinely need like their own path, but it's just there. That's just not given to kids. You know, it's difficult to give that, but it's kind of the best thing that that's the best case scenario. But it's just difficult, you know, to actually get them ready for the workforce, you know?
Tocqueville was far from the only critic of this new type of aristocracy. Thinkers as diverse as the German scientist and philosopher Wilhelm von Humboldt, the economist Karl Marx, the liberal political thinker John Stuart Mill, and the philosopher Bertrand Russell were all deeply critical of the mass subordination of people as wage earners. And today, contemporary philosophers like David Ellerman make a strong case that there are uncomfortable similarities between slaves and employees.
What we have today is a system where workers are rented instead of purchased. If you had a voluntary slavery system as a hypothetical system, they would be selling all their labor once for their whole lifetime. That was very inconvenient for the masters because then you had to support the slaves during good times and bad. Whereas if you just rent them, then in bad times you can just lay them off and then hire them back in good times. And that's the system we have today, is where you have the employer-employee contracts.
The truly remarkable thing, though, is that despite all of the criticism and despite the extraordinary changes the world has seen since the Industrial Revolution, the aristocratic or the non-democratic model of work still dominates today.
Yeah, so the system remains the same. You know, there's no real difference if you're a sawmill worker in the 1850s or if you work at a bank, you know, in 2025. The employment contract reigns supreme. You know, you still rent yourself to an employer and agrees to subordinate yourself to a board of directors that you cannot elect in return for a wage. So that system remains, and what has happened is that it's spread all over the world. There's this meme that I saw that I think was pretty funny, where the boss came with this nice new sports car the other day to work, and then the employee says, "Hey boss, that's a great new sports car." And the boss says, "Well, if you really put an effort and you do all your hours next year and really dedicate yourself to this work, then I might buy an even bigger one next year." There seems to be something that's just wrong with the way that work is organized today. I would like to highlight four key problems with the system. So one is, of course, job satisfaction. We know today from a lot of research that one of the key contributors to stress and burnout is that people don't feel like they have any control or are able to impact their daily work.
According to this research, work that combines high demands with little control or influence for the employee can cause fatigue, stress, depression, anxiety, insomnia, cardiovascular disease, and back pain.
Gallup does these international polls where they ask people, how engaged are you at work? And in the latest poll that I saw, it was 77% of the global workforce that said that they were not engaged at work. And about a quarter of them actually said that they're actively disengaged at work.
And this matters a lot because studies also indicate that how much we enjoy our work is hugely important for our overall happiness. One study claims that the quality of work is the second most important factor for our overall sense of well-being. The only thing that affects our well-being more is mental illness.
So the second problem is democracy. And this goes back to John Stuart Mill, the father of modern liberalism. He said that, you don't learn how to swim or read or write or anything by just watching someone else do it. You need to practice it.
The mental and moral, like the muscular powers, are improved only by being used.
You can't have a well-functioning political democracy without people practicing it in their daily lives. They should practice it in their local community, but also, of course, where they spend most of their waking hours in the workplace. The opposite is, of course, true as well. So in a lot of workplaces, the managers can basically tell you, what you can and cannot say at work, but also even outside of work. They can tell you, of course, what you should wear, when you can eat, when you can take your toilet breaks.
Yeah, my job doesn't tell me when I can take toilet breaks, but they just say that you can get fired if you speak negatively about it.
So what do you think will happen if you have these institutions where people spend their whole lives just taking orders? Of course, that's going to impact how people see themselves. And then, of course, you'll have other people who will see it as natural that they should rule and give orders. So the third problem is inequality. So again, you have the system of some people who are renting themselves, the workers, and then you have some people who own the companies, the owners. And the workers, they get wages, and the owners, they get the profits.
And while the wages that go to the employees have stagnated, the profits that go to the small group of owners are at an all-time high. This division has contributed to the extreme wealth inequalities that I have talked about in a number of previous videos. But the aristocratic organization of work also leads to inequality in another way.
This is also, it's not necessarily connected, but I've also found it interesting that administrators as well, they're higher on the totem pole, in schools, I guess, compared to teachers. They get paid more. So I guess it is similar. But they don't own the school, obviously, but they are paid more. And it kind of sucks, you know what I'm saying? Teachers are doing 90% of the work, you know what I'm saying? And they just get kind of the shit end of the stick. And it's unfortunate. Teachers genuinely are not paid close to enough.
Since the owners of these companies are often themselves quite wealthy, they don't care that much if the board and the top managers give themselves bonuses and paychecks that sometimes, can be bigger in a year than what the average worker makes in a lifetime.
In 1965, the average Fortune 500 CEO was paid 21 times as much as a typical worker.
If I am correct, the new statistic is that's too high now. The new statistic is 350 workers or something like that instead of 21.
In 2022, the CEO was paid 344 times as much.
And the fourth problem is inefficiency.
The inefficiency problem is just like the inequality problem, based on the fact that there is a division between, on the one hand, people who work in the company for a wage, and on the other hand, the owners of the company who take the profits.
The owners, they want the workers to work as much as possible for as little as possible, and the workers want to work as little as possible for as much as possible. How do you deal with this? Throughout history, you've had all these kinds of Taylorism, where you break down the work process into small details and try to destroy all autonomy and just keep control of everyone. Today, we have the rise of a whole huge consultancy industry that is trying to make people feel as if they are owners and they should identify with the company. But you have this basic problem that you have some people who are just not owning the place. And why should they care about the long-term development of someone else's company? And it's interesting because there's this whole economics literature that is all about theorizing how managers needs to have shares in the company in order to feel dedication and care about the company and have the right incentives and so on. But very few have questioned, well, why doesn't that go for the whole workforce? Why shouldn't the people on the shop floor also be an owner?
In the beginning of the 20th century,
true.
the inefficiency problem of modern companies got worse as stock exchanges became a dominant force in our economies.
So then instead of having, one owner who knows everything about the company, maybe walks around there, is, personally very invested in it, suddenly you have huge numbers of people who are owning the company. So this leads to another big problem, namely who is monitoring the board and the top managers, who are doing the supervising. The employees cannot do it because they're disenfranchised, they have no voting rights. And the shareholders, they don't know what's going on in the company.
Economists refer to this as the principal agent problem, and during the last few decades, as a new type of owner has entered the markets, this problem has gotten even worse.
With the rise of index funds that you have today, so you have a few really big passive asset managers like BlackRock, State Street and Vanguard, which is called the Big Three. Their whole business model is that they don't care at all about what's going on in the companies that they own.
So the non-democratic model of work that dominates today, it makes people miserable, it undermines democracy, it creates inequality, and it's hugely inefficient. But what if there were an alternative, one that addressed all of these issues at once?
I can't help but believe that in the future we'll see in the United States and throughout the Western world an increasing trend toward the next logical step, employee ownership. It's a path that benefits a free people.
So there is, of course, an alternative, which not so many...
Bro, that's a Republican. It's a Republican saying that, bro. That just shows you, like, how far right politics has moved over time, bro. It's actually kind of wild. Like, I would have never have thought Reagan would have said that. Like, that's fucking nuts.
People may have heard about, but it's that instead of companies being owned and run by owners, they're owned and run by the people working in the firms. So these are sometimes referred to as democratic companies or employee-owned companies. This is, of course, not a new idea. There are definitely figures from both the left and the right who've been very much in favor of this. Interesting example is Ronald Reagan, who is hardly a well-known Marxist, but you also have the kind of Bernie Sanders democratic socialists who is very much in favor of employee-owned companies.
So when we talk about democracy, it's not only, the right to vote every 4 years, it really has to do with what goes on 24 hours a day. Democracy means having some control over your life when you work. And that's what employee ownership means to me.
Even a hyper-capitalist like the private equity firm KKR partner Pete Stavros is an outspoken proponent of employee ownership.
This is the right thing to do that also happens to be good business. Ownership is really an ethos, it's a mindset. This is an unbelievably popular idea with liberal progressives and MAGA Republicans and everything in between.
So if we go back to these four problems that we talked about, let's talk about the first two, satisfaction and democracy. And there is quite a lot of research now that backs up the intuitions that a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers had, that if people feel like they can participate in work and have more say, then they tend to feel more satisfaction at work, and they tend also to be more active outside of work, maybe in civil society.
And this would all, this all applies to confluencism as well. Like, if you haven't watched my videos before, confluencism is about employee ownership, but having that, be dynamic and based on how much you put into the company, so the value you create. And it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary, but it would be voted on by your company democratically, so that system can change over time and essentially like balance out. And it would get to a point once it's actually fair for everybody. And of course, that doesn't sound like the most efficient thing, but it actually is the best thing for everybody, because once you get that system worked out for your company in specific, you're set. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have to change it again. The system's good. Each role has their impact adequately calculated into their ownership. You know what I'm saying? Like what they put in is actually what they're worth. And that's what, should be strived for with business. You know what I'm saying? People having the right to share their voice in their company and not like be attacked for it because it makes the management look bad or something. You know what I'm saying? And people are just should be entitled to the fruits of their labor. You know what I'm saying? And when you have business owners and stockholders outside of the company, that's an extraction of wealth from workers, and people who invest, they don't necessarily care because it's passive income for them. But passive income isn't passive for anybody. You know what I mean? That wealth has to come from somewhere, and it's created by the workers in that company, and those are the people who should truly be entitled to that fruit. You know what I'm saying? And that's what employee ownership fixes. But traditional employee ownership structures I've seen haven't been dynamic, and it's like for example with the fluctuating ownership model, it resets every 3 months, so there's no entrenchment of power within employee ownership like businesses. So yeah, if you are interested in that, definitely check out my other videos. Yeah, let's get
So if we
back
take
into
the third problem with inequality, the question is, what do you do with it? And of course there is one common solution, which is redistribution. So that's one solution, but of course there is
redistribution, as in like free healthcare, I think is good, but redistribution as in fairly flattening, like everybody gets paid the same, no, it's not good, because there's going to be some lazy people.
there are other solutions which are sometimes referred to as pre-distribution. So pre-distribution is about creating a system.
Let's read this. So redistribution, income taxes, wealth taxes, welfare programs, universal basic income, tax credit and subsidies, employee ownership, strong labor rights, minimum wages, antitrust enforcement, public education. Okay. Yeah, I mean, redistribution, some of it isn't necessarily bad. But it has to go to the right thing, you know what I'm saying? And it has to come from the right people. Like, when you have a transitionary period coming from, billionaires owning everything to breaking up those companies, turning them into employee ownership following fluctuating ownership models, you can then help them turn into a employee ownership business, but there are still going to be a time period where there is going to be rich people, so you can tax them and take some of their money that they're extracting from workers. So it's going back to the workers at some point. Unfortunately, it isn't straight into their pocket like employee ownership, but during a transitionary period, it isn't bad. That's usually the best time to use wealth or income taxes. For example, with the Community Wealth Fund and Confluencism, there is an incentive where the more you invest into it, you can actually, say you're investing into it, you can then lower that person's income tax. So if you're if you're enticing people to invest into this and you're then only taxing those profits, right? Because that's the way the community wealth fund works, is you tax the profits that's created from their investment pool, that they, like, all the money that they've put into the community wealth fund. So over time, the more money they put in and the more money that they save, they can slowly save more and more money from their income tax. So that frees up more income, disposable income for people, and the government isn't necessarily losing money, but also people are freeing up money, which is kind of wild, you know, because you're only taxing profits from the investing of those people's capital. So, you know,
where wealth is distributed much more equally from the get-go. So by having companies that are owned by the workers, capital immediately is distributed much more equally than if it's, you know, outside shareholders.
In democratic companies, the salary gap is also narrower. For example, in Mondragon, one of the world's largest democratic companies, the CEO is paid 6 times the average worker salary.
So come back to the fourth problem with efficiency.
that's amazing.
There are a lot
That's
of
like
people
unironically,
thought
that's
that
great.
Employee-owned companies, they cannot work. Monkeys cannot run the zoo, as a banker once said. And there's a lot of economists who've theorized, you know, these companies will underinvest, people will, you know, slack and free ride, and we don't have to theorize so much about it, because now we have a lot of empirical research that have compared companies that are owned by the employees with companies that are not. And what these studies now show is that they tend to outperform.
Employee-owned companies are more productive, they have lower employee turnover, their employees are more likely to suggest improvements, and they are more innovative.
To me, the reason why employee ownership is so relevant today is that it is a source of stability in an increasingly unstable world. So not only has it been proven time and time again to improve company resilience, but it is also a very effective way of anchoring jobs, wealth, and ownership in local communities. And this is especially important in a globalized economy, where companies can easily relocate across borders overnight, and absentee owners can extract profits without ever setting foot in the business. So employee ownership prevents these extractive practices.
At this point, you might be thinking, if this is all true, that democratic companies make people less miserable, it strengthens democracy, it leads to less inequality and even superior performance, then why do non-democratic companies still dominate in our economy?
It's a good question, bro.
You know, in Voltaire's Candide, a famous novel, there is this character called Dr. Pangloss, and they go around the world and they see all these miseries and all these things that are bad. But whatever happens, Dr. Pangloss, he just says, well, you know, we live in the best of all worlds. You know, God created it this way, so everything that happens is just the best possible outcome.
All that is for the best. If there is a volcano at Lisbon, it cannot be elsewhere. It is impossible that things should be other than they are, for everything is right.
And sometimes I hear people having kind of a similar reasoning about the current state of the economy. We're living in the best of all possible worlds because, you know, it's created by the market or whatever. But what if the market doesn't lead, you know, to the optimal outcome? In fact, you know, there is, as I've mentioned, there is a lot of empirical research that shows that a lot of democratic companies are more efficient than conventionally owned competitors.
Surveys also show that this is what people want. 72% of Americans would rather work for an employee-owned company than one owned by external owners or the
Owned by the state, that's just like Uber commie. 9% of the US. That's actually wild. I actually would have expected it was a lot less for people to say that. Owned by investors, yeah, no,
State.
that's just...
So the question that you should be asking
no.
yourself is more, well, then what is the problem with the market as it's structured today?
There are many such problems that make the market biased towards aristocratic, non-democratic companies.
Prices for manufacturing being in the US so high that we can't have manufacturing here, so the employees of those manufacturing can own their businesses, and the only people that have to be workers in the US here are corporate slaves, and I don't know, something along those lines, bro. I'm just kind of yapping. I was just trying to guess. Let's see.
These problems include wealth inequality, path dependency, lack of supportive legislation and institutions, resistance from unions, and the concentrated nature of our economy. But
Yeah, you know, it was kind of close. Yeah, it was pretty close. Yeah, I was on track. I was on the road to getting to where he was talking about. You know what I'm saying?
there is one even bigger problem.
The biggest problem, perhaps, is just the lack of knowledge. The most common question I get when I'm out talking about these things is like, I didn't even know those companies existed. And in fact, there already are, thousands, tens of thousands of these companies around. The biggest and most famous is probably the Mondragon Corporation in the Basque region
I've talked about them actually.
It's a network of more than 90 different democratic companies employing more than 70,000 workers.
Nuts, bro. It's nuts.
1/3 of all cars globally use components made at Mondragon. 1/2 of all trains are built using Mondragon machines, and 90% of all airplanes are using their technology solutions.
Oh, wow.
La empresa es nuestra, pero somos trabajadores también, ¿no? Entonces, no hay como un jefe que pueda haber en otras empresas, ¿no? Todos somos nuestros jefes y todos tenemos que tirar para adelante con la empresa.
Es el futuro, entendemos, del mundo laboral también.
In countries like Sweden and much of the world, employee ownership is still very rare, but there are signs that this is beginning to change. In the United States, a standardized model
It's gonna be quick.
ESOP has existed since the 1970s. This allows workers to gradually buy out a company when an owner wants to exit. And today, ESOP companies employ 15 million people in the US, which is 10%.
My father's business actually. My father's job. That place. They're an ESOP, but they don't let union workers do it. So like he's in the union, so like he can't. So I don't know.
Of the private workforce. Proponents of the ESOP model see it as a game changer for employee ownership in our economy.
I think that ESOPs are a game changer because they allow workers to become owners of their companies without requiring them to invest their personal savings or put their assets at risk. ESOPs are essentially a leverage buyout, meaning that the company's available cash flow is used to repay the acquisition debt. And this solves the financing problems that workers often face when they are considering buying their companies.
And in the UK, a similar model was implemented 10 years ago, and already there are 2,000 ESOP companies in the UK employing 250,000 workers. And last year, an ESOP model was endorsed by the government of Canada, and a new improved European ESOP model has also been developed and implemented as a pilot in Slovenia, where it's expected to be implemented into law in 2025. Only 18% of the global population today believes that the current economic system works for them. And as the philosopher Slavoj Žižek and others have pointed out, it's often easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. Despite signs of progress, most of us still spend our lives in non-democratic companies.
Nah, bro, you guys are gonna see confluencism, bro. Like, you just have to believe. Like, you know, you just have to support confluencism, you know what I'm saying? Support, you know what I'm saying? Share it to your friends, subscribe, like. What are you doing? Please?
We take orders from a small group of people who reap the profits of our labor. And this system is designed to make us feel powerless, but we are not powerless. Change is possible, but change doesn't just happen. As Patrick reminds us in his book, whoever wants change can start by being the change today. So if you run a company, you can make it democratic. And if you work for a non-democratic company, you can already today start treating all of your colleagues as equals. Because the question isn't whether democratic companies can work. We know that they do. The question isn't whether a better world is possible, because we know that it is. The question is, what behaviors are each of us willing to change today to make it happen? My name is Anders Acevedo, and this is The Market Exit.
Man, yeah, man, go subscribe to the Market Exit, man. Obviously, doing a lot better than me. But you know, very good video, very good video. It was very high quality. Dude, the editing was nuts, man. I am a fiend for editing, and I'm nowhere near as good. Like, it's constant for 25 minutes. Like, this is insane, bro. The production value is nuts, bro. But
Very effective.
no, dude, fuck, content absolutely beautiful. You know, ESOPs are a very good way of actually going about transitioning to employee ownership. But if there was essentially a mandate, maybe like Slovenia is doing, where every time a person wants to sell their stock, essentially, they can go into that ESOP program for that business. And I think that it would be a very quick switch. Ownership would right into workers. It's almost like we'd blink and workers are now in control of the means of production. It's pretty wild. That's one of the routes you can take. You know what I'm saying? You can go very different ways. But yeah, I'm gonna start yapping and end this video because it's 43 minutes and I have to edit this. And I'm probably gonna Flights Reacted and just post it raw. You know. Let's see. All right. Peace.